Stage is yours, Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So today, team, we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, troubleshooting Sitecore. And not implicitly saying that Sitecore is the problem. We're going to go through here. We're going to find out in many cases, Sitecore is not the problem, but our approach, our DevOps, maybe our governance, is at the root of a lot of the issues. So we're going to be talking a lot today about, there's a Sitecore platform, there's our custom code application layer, and then we've got other aspects such as the infrastructure layer. So we're going to be in a little bit about the 4Cs today. We talk about troubleshooting. So we're going to be talking about the code, the configuration, the cloud platform, as well as the content. And you could have issues across any of those four areas. So this presentation really is not to beat up on Sitecore, but really focused on how do we approach good troubleshooting that can get us to fast resolution for issues. So as we jump in on that, just a quick introduction. My name is Kelly Rusk, Enterprise Architect and Sitecore with Glotech. Been involved in the Sitecore space for about 15 years and really the web space for about 30. And I say that with every day I learn something new, something humbles me, and there's something new to troubleshoot. And so I'm hoping today that I can give you one thing that you can take away that makes your life easier. So you're not up late or up early, scratching your head or wondering, how do I approach this problem? And what do I do specifically? So as we go through this, we're going to talk about kind of common Sitecore troubleshooting scenarios. You'll discover that some of these scenarios really apply across web applications. We're going to talk about some of the weird things I've seen from the field, from my time at previous organizations and supporting many different clients. We're going to go through kind of a 12-step runbook to recovery, and how do we get ourselves out of a jam as quick as possible if one comes up. Really get into a little bit of DevOps and governance when we talk about preventing problems before they happen, and then talk about some of my favorite tools and methods. So with that, we'll jump in, and any questions, pop in at any time, and we'll kick them in. So with that, we're going to jump into common troubleshooting scenarios. So one of the most common complaints that we see is they're slow loading on startup. Like it's taking forever Sitecore to start up. So this really goes into, have you considered caching and warm-up tuning? So I'm talking about warm-up tuning. I'm talking about application initialization, and that's more of a .NET aspect. I'm also speaking to, have you optimized your caches? Are you tuning your caches to really ensure that it starts up really well? Have you worked on your dependency injection? Are you bloated in your startup? Maybe adding too much stuff. Is your deployment too heavy? So when we talk about slow loading on startup, just the Sitecore application starting up, is it going too slow? And if so, is there some caching and warm-up tuning that needs to happen? The next thing is, after it started up, is, I've got a slow page load. Do you have heavy or bad code? Are you going too deep in your code and relating too many features to each other, when really they should be independent and follow more of a modular helix pattern where we have foundational code that's spread across all your features, and then maybe project level that goes all the way down. And if you're headless, that's okay too. Do you have things on the front end that are very lightweight and speaking to your back end? If you're also slow, do you have bots going on? Good bots or bad bots? We don't care. Bots are bots. You need to throttle them or control them. Maybe you're low on resources. Maybe you need a Sitecore patch, or a Sitecore patch has been applied that has implications for your custom code. And you have a lot of cache evictions. And cache evictions, you see them. What happens when you have caching, I've got a blog post about this, is it takes up memory, but it takes up CPU cycles to commit things to cache. So you got to double it. When you do a cache eviction, you can get a lot of spinning going on in your application. So that slow page load, you're really looking at, hey, when I have a cache eviction, it now has to take CPU cycles away from serving other needs to commit it into memory. And both of those are precious resources. You have to look at your session state settings in your back end. How are you doing in Azure SQL? Are things rolling back in like they should? And lastly, a lot of people may not be aware, but sometimes marketers might go off, and your marketing team might go off and do a campaign without telling IT. And so you woke up in the morning to, 3 million visits because somebody did a Super Bowl ad. You didn't know that there's a Super Bowl ad. You weren't scaled for it. What do you do, right? So when you look at your slow page load, you really want to be thinking about a few things. Am I structured properly in a modular framework and following a design pattern for my code to make everything as lightweight as possible, so I don't have deep dependencies and cross dependencies that cause issues? Do I have adequate hardware resources, enough overhead to handle a hit? Have I communicated with my team members to know, and other business units to know what to expect from marketing campaigns or other things that might be coming to the site? And also on the front end, have I considered how I'm serving this information? Am I leveraging a CDN? We'll talk more about that later. So when your page won't load at all, do you have a network or code error going on? So this is where you definitely want to have easy access to your logs, maybe leverage Splunk or App Insights if you're in Azure to compile those things so you can quickly get to the source of it. You might have an assets on page not loading when using the CDN. I've seen this a lot. And it could be that you need to clear your cache, or maybe your CD configuration is not in place. When we look at solar, you might have things not rebuilding. And most of the time it's your configuration is incorrect. Maybe you don't have rebuild cores in place. If you have a solar-based page, blogs are a very common example. You want to make sure that you have the rebuilding in place and using switch on rebuild. The reason you want to use switch on rebuild, or really emphasize this, is that rebuild core, it gets rebuilt in the background and it swaps in once it's done. And the value of that is you're not stuck waiting for their site down or the page not having content on it, more likely, while things are rebuilding. Another thing to look for is, and again, in session state, high acquire request state. So if you're starting to see a lot of high acquire request states, your session state might need to be tuned. And it could be that you're storing your session state in Redis, and it could be a hardware issue, you need more power, and it could be that you're stuffing custom objects into your session state. And that's where I can't say this strongly enough. Do not store custom objects in Sitecore session state. Preserve that for Sitecore session state, get another Redis instance or another state provider if you have shared objects that need to be considered or shared values across your CD instances. So these are a couple of big things that come up a lot that we see, right? And everyone says, oh, my site's slow. I'm getting these error codes. I'm not seeing my content. And these are some core reasons behind it. Continuing with that, null errors, talking again, 4 C's, right? Content being one of them. Have you published your templates? Are there any issues there? Or maybe a bad code release where it's not referencing these properly? Are you getting intermittent solar results where it's there, then it's not? Well, okay, do we have switching going on here? Are you getting intermittent errors depending on what CD server somebody might be on? And that gets into sticky sessions. So there's a time and place for stateful applications. But if you can get off of sticky sessions and round robin, you might have more performance. You're less likely to have some issues. But usually when you see intermittent errors, it's because of deployment didn't deploy the code to all the same CDs. Let's say you have 8 CD servers and you do an Octopus deploy. And Octopus deploy only deploys to 6 to 8 of them. Or you manually added some code to servers, which is a no-no, but you had to do it, right? Users that come to that CD are going to be affected. They'll have a different user experience. So consider, where do I have sticky sessions enabled? You have the same code base across the board? Because if things are intermittent, that tells you things are not equal. So you really want to look at that. Another common troubleshooting scenario is, hey, Sitecore publishing is slow, which ask anyone who's a content editor, they're always going to tell the publishing slow, even if it's wicked fast, because for them, that perception is always there, and you have to ask themselves, okay, was their definition of slow for publishing? What's the scope of publishing? Do I have workflows and publishing governance? So that way I don't have 8 people publishing all the site at once. They should be publishing per item, perhaps. There should be workflows to control this and let it come into place. Do you have multiple languages? Remember, languages are a multiplier when you publish. So if your CMS publishing is slow, evaluate your multiplier of how many languages do I have? Because if you publish one item with 12 languages, you just publish 12 items. So that's really a multiplier effect you have to take into consideration. And you might want to evaluate the publishing service to hopefully manage some of this in a better state. If you're using XConnect, and I urge everyone to get off of XConnect and consider some more of the Sitecore personalized options if you desperately need that level of capability. But if you are, look at your networking and connectivity. Most of the XConnect errors are related to networking and certificates, or if someone's modified something. I have a series of blogs on the bits.byte.com that deal with XConnect and certificate matching. So something to consider. And if you're in the SaaS world or you've gone components or composable, and you're having issues with components not communicating, remember they're all their own little stack, best of breed with their own stack. You know, look at your networking, the connectors especially, and licensing considerations. Like maybe you ran out of a licensing situation. Maybe the network has had an issue connecting to composable agent. So there's a value in being composable once you have your core pillar of your CMS. There's other add-ons, but because they are truly separate applications that interoperate with your core, you need to take into consideration really, if you can, apply monitoring, and we'll talk more about that soon, to manage those composable elements that are unique. So I'm going to stop for a second here and ask the question, has anyone run across these kind of common scenarios? Does it seem familiar?
At least I've run into this sticky sessions issues with when it comes with the F5.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, if you don't have the cookie affinity, then you'll be like, why is this breaking? And when I try to submit a form or running into those kind of issues.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely prevalent. So it's kind of hard. And that's why we talk about those 4Cs, because you have your code, you have your configuration of your content, but you also have the cloud platform and infrastructure. And so sticky sessions plays a role there.
Yeah, agreed.
And it definitely can impact you. So let's talk about some other aspects that kind of get interesting. So let's talk about some of the weirdest things I've seen from the field, mix it up a little bit. And that weird icon there, yep, that is what I look like about around 6 a.m. in the morning. That's me getting out of bed. If you're wondering, what is that creature on the screen? That's me at 6 a.m. So some weird things I've seen across implementations is that we had intermittent failures with some users in the past of our app, and a redeploy didn't work because it didn't properly apply the code across instances, and sticky sessions were unused while we were talking about sticky sessions. So even in an app service scenario with multiple instances, sometimes Azure has a hiccup and it required a redeploy, especially with sticky sessions, to make sure that each and every instance had the same code base. Now, Microsoft has made great bounds on the app services to ensure that redundancy is coming off kind of the master deploy when you deploy to a single instance and replicate out. But that's something that has happened before, and the redeploys have fixed it. But it was problematic because we're thinking, hey, you know, in PaaS, these web apps, they're just copies of each other. It's the same code across these instances. But sure enough, we had a few that had a little Azure hiccup. So if you see something weird, don't be afraid to redeploy. And especially after Microsoft does maybe a monthly patch or an application, what they call an update, a platform update to Azure. Occasionally, you will have some instances that are stuck on maybe the old version and not the new thing that it is to platform upgrade on. And that can cause you to have some instances that are stuck in an old state and you get inconsistency. So just be aware of that. And the good way to resolve that is stop the web app for 20 seconds, start it back up. If you can't do a stop and start, scale up and scale down out of your app service plan. And the goal there is inside of Azure's App Fabric to force you to be on a new host. Because if you get your new host, we have more authority that all your instances are running in the same space that they should. We had bot-like traffic. One of the clients had horrible bot-like traffic that was happening on a regular basis. And a client was DDoSing themselves by having a hacking rewards competition. They didn't tell anyone that it was going on. Somebody thought it was a good idea in a separate department, and they literally were DDoSing themselves. And they lost inordinate amounts of money, more money than they would have had for the hacking rewards. There's a time and place to do a chaos monkey like Netflix used to do. Chaos monkey is one way that they can test their infrastructure, but I highly recommend a lot of communication, especially if you're having a hacking competition. Let's consider the scope of that and not DDoS yourself. So these are kind of laughable now, but these kept many people up for many, many days. Site was showing no traffic, but visiting the site was horrible response time. And that's because the site was redirected to the old site. So DNS plays a role here, and everyone's like, oh man, the new site's up. But the response time's horrible. It's just not, it's not working well. There's no improvements here. It doesn't even look right. It didn't look right because it wasn't the right website. they had not updated their DNS and were pointing to the old version of the site on a whole different set of servers. So kind of outlandish that can happen, right? And this is one of my favorite ones. The site was magically showing errors without any changes in air quotes. And they said, no changes at all for weeks, nothing going on here. We got into the logs and looked at the deployments, and sure enough, they had a teammate deploying code but telling no one about it. So he was a midnight hero, midnight cowboy up here, deploying code that he thought was interesting, went around all the stage gates, was deploying directly into production to see if it would work so he could test his changes, and then he'd roll into the DevOps pipeline later. So, it's important to really talk to your teammates and understand, hey, what are we doing from DevOps perspective? We have governance here. Should we even allow devs to touch the production environment? Or should that be a special deployment team? So in thinking about your governance, really consider, how do I avoid this really weird thing from happening, right? Another one of my favorite ones that was many days of work, the CD was not loading despite being load tested and found in QA. We're like, hey, it's the same content delivery node. Why is it not working? It's because they had messed up the role configuration in part of the deployment. Maybe we were deploying the CMS role over the CD. So they didn't have their session state. They didn't have a lot of their other aspects. So that core Sitecore role of CMS was rolled over their CD code in the CD server, and they couldn't find out for about 3 to 4 days why their CD was not loading properly in the production environment, and they had to keep rolling back. So you have to respect the roles. So if you have if you have in your source repos that sense of, here's CMS based code, and I'm going to keep the actual bits of Sitecore, if you're going to manage that and take on the responsibility, make sure you've got that pipeline very clear, which is common in a Docker situation, right? So we're using AKS or Kubernetes to host your virtual machines, and considering the AKS overall as a platform, it's very role based. In that situation, you're going to have your core image, which it might be a CMS or a CD image. They're different images. So you want to make sure that the right image gets deployed. So when those layers come together, we talk a lot about layers and containers, right? You've got that Sitecore role layer and your custom code layer. Make sure you've got the right role, or else you can run into this interesting dynamic. So wait, there's more. I've got 5 more interesting things from the field that are painful and hopefully will make you laugh, cry, or stay up all night wondering, is this going to happen to me? So as we look at this, let's head on next here and go on to the next slide. So one organization had unexpected load every Monday on the CD, and no one could understand what was going on in the CD every Monday morning. And someone had enabled the Sitecore admin login on the CD server instead of using the CMS. So editors were using the CD server every Monday morning for their updates. And they had a massive amount of content to get out Monday morning. So every Monday morning, they were crashing out their CD server because they had all these publishing operations going on. All that load on the CMS was just crushing them. And it was because it was on the CD. So make sure you lock down, use your DevOps and stage gates to ensure that things are not something where somebody can just willy-nilly enable something. Production should be a holy land guarded by, flaming swords, literally. Keep that locked down and make sure that you have a team dedicated to that. So when you hear me talk about governance a lot, and for those that hear me speak before about governance, I have a work program. Embrace governance. It's going to save you so many times over. I had a site stopping every night and coming back in the morning. And someone had scheduled an Azure automation job to shut down dev each night, but they accidentally ran against prod instead. So Azure automation is great for saving some costs, some resource time. You have to make sure you target your environments properly, or else you can end up running into a pretty interesting situation. Next one was a painful one of the more painful ones. Solar rebuilt, but old data was on the site depending on the user. And this is more of the primary to secondary solar environment, not solar cloud. The CDs were hitting the load balancer in front of the primary secondary, but they're also not looking at the right index. And this is due to a solar limitation. So when you have rebuilds going on in that master slave primary secondary solar environment, there's a limitation of traditional solar. And using Solar Cloud resolves that because you have true redundancy and sharding of your information across the board, or really replication, not sharding. I would advise you against sharding. And last thing that was interesting was site was showing errors using Sitecore Commerce, and they deployed the wrong version of the Commerce engine and use custom DLLs. So if Sitecore has DLLs, try not to modify them. So that's some weird stuff I've seen through my field. I'm going to stop for a second, ask, has anyone seen some weird stuff like this or want to share something weird they've seen or have any questions so far? And Erica, I think I see you off mute. Do you have any questions, comments, concerns, or just feeling pain from looking at these examples? Okay. I'm going to continue forward now. We're going to talk about what do we do when issues hit? So the 12-step runbook, retime to embrace for troubleshooting, really comes down to the main questions we should ask and the order we need to ask them and to get resolution. So the first question we always ask is, what changed recently? And when we say what changed recently, we want to talk about all 4 C's. Did we change code? Did we change configuration? Did we change content? And did we change anything in our cloud platform and infrastructure? If you can say no across those 4, go to the next step. But if you can answer that something's changed across one of those 4 aspects or layers, it's time to review it and say, okay, let's dive into what that change is. Hopefully you have source control, some good comparisons, code base, you can see what was changed. Next, look at, is there a clear error code on the site? A lot of times people forget to look at the error codes, and that might be infrastructure or Sitecore. It could be, I can't connect to the back end. Maybe I lost my peering to an application I depend on, or a third-party vendor has a certificate issue. Ask yourself, was there a recent deployment and networking change, a large publishing or a spike in traffic? Again, using that Super Bowl example, I remember flying home and getting off the airplane to a disaster where we had to build out massive CDs very quickly because the marketing team did not tell everyone they were doing a Super Bowl ad. And millions more in traffic were hitting their website than they thought they would have. Good for the company, but bad for the experience, because we had to get their site up and throw a lot of CDs quite quickly and monitor that for a couple of days. Is there what's in the APM tool in Sitecore logs? So if you have App Insights, great to look at. If you can pull down your Sitecore logs, use a Sitecore log analyzer, one of my favorite tools. We'll talk about that soon. Or if you have an APM like Datadog, jump in and leverage that APM tool and say, okay, what am I seeing in APM? I might be seeing a load issue. I might be seeing, maybe I'll see a path or a waterfall. If you can get a waterfall view where things are stopping or error codes, you're in business risk resolution. So I'm going to stop after this first 4. Does this make sense so far as kind of the steps and how we're getting deeper here? Or any questions or comments thus far? Okay, here and then we'll continue. So after that, if nothing's in APM, let's look at how's the performance of the front-end service, the web apps. Do they have the power profile they need? Do you see issues maybe with Redis? How's your performance of any composable components, Sitecore search, networking, personalized, anything tied to the front end or third-party aspects? Are those having latency issues? If you use commerce especially, look and make sure, do you back up in transactions? How's the performance of session state, like Redis? Is it properly configured and scaled? Do you have additional things for max timeouts to ensure that somebody isn't holding up the queue for everybody else when it comes to session state? For your database backend, if you're using Azure SQL as an example, are you using elastic pools? And have you allowed those to scale properly? And did you break out some databases with a database NACS so one database can't take over your whole pool? So if you go into Azure SQL and you look at your elastic pool, you can declare the database NACS as far as how much power it can take up, whether that's DTUs or vCores. And that gives you a powerful tool to make sure that it hits a ceiling and doesn't crash out other aspects. A lot of people overlook their Solar search provider. They think that Solar and search and Beanstalk or Elastic, whatever you're doing, is infinite. It may not be, and it might not be properly configured. So if you're having issues, don't be afraid to look at solar, and that's number 9 on the list because that's where it tends to pop up. Number 10, looking at performance of network and edge devices. Do you have outages or certificates expired? Maybe matching thumbprints aren't right. Is there an Azure outage or an AWS outage or something affecting your load balancer? Maybe something in Azure Front Door or AWS on the route is affected. Are your load balancers healthy? And when we look at number 11, we're thinking about, is it unexpected or unwanted traffic? And this is an interesting one because this gets into, is the traffic nefarious? And I would caution you to say, oh, we're being hacked. I would caution you towards that. Instead, I would say we have unwanted, unexpected traffic because it helps you get to the source quite quickly. And then you can say, yes, somebody was trying to hack us or DDoS us, right? If you are in the US and you only have US clients, why is someone in Thailand sending you 8 million visits? It might be suspect and they're probably not actually in Thailand. But you could have a lot of unexpected, unwanted traffic because of bots being aggressive on crawling. Like even a Google bot could be aggressive. You could have unexpected surge in traffic because of maybe the marketing team's running a special promotion or driving traffic your way from an SEO perspective. And number 12 is the repeat, because this is the question of, are you sure there are no recent deployments or large publishing? And if so, you're sure, it may be time to open up a Sitecore support ticket for hotfixes. And if you go to Sitecore support, they've got a list of known issues, and you can review that and search for that. And if you start seeing these issues, especially after code deployment, I would say the first thing is don't try to fix it in prod. Just roll back. Roll back, deal with your stakeholders. It's better to get it back in the laboratory and load test and test features and regression test your suite. Maybe use BlazeMeter. You can load up your BlazeMeter and do your regression test. It's better to do that than try to fix things in prod, possible. Unless you know it's a quick fix, like something in infrastructure. Oh yeah, this load balancer went out when you do a failover and I have to press a button. Great. Or Cloudflare. Oh, I need to clear the cache. Something's not clearing properly. That's a quick fix. But you need to weigh the time and benefit of that versus if it's not a quick fix, or I'm not sure, maybe the least painful path is to bring us back down to a lower environment. Make sure we go through our stage gates of dev, QA stage, then back to production with a proper fix. So I'm going to stop here for a minute and ask a question. What do you all think about this runbook? Is this intuitive? Does it seem more stating what you kind of naturally do? Is this helpful from a, let's put it on our desk and keep it around in case of an emergency? Or any thoughts about this, these kind of 12 steps? And there's no commentary. We can move on forward and start talking about some best practices here. Yes,
Yeah, I
Bob.
don't see any questions in the chat. I think we should be good.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure I stop and pause in case any of these things bring something up for you. And again, the whole goal of this is I'm hoping if there's one thing that can help you out of this presentation, I would consider a success for you. So my hope is that we can grab one thing that makes you consider, you know what, maybe I do need to go back and look at my code base. Or, you know what, I need to consider the load balancers. Or, you know what, I haven't revisited solar in a while. Maybe I need to go take a look at that and see, maybe even my solar servers have too many logs built up on them. Maybe I didn't do any log trimming. And that's why solar is going slow, it's out of space. So again, just trying to catch one thing for you all to help you all out. So let's talk about, on that note, in segue, preventing problems before they happen. So how can we be the superhero that nobody ever needs to see? And that's the whole comment of the boss comes into your office one day and says, I'm not sure what you do here because everything's so quiet. And you retort, it's quiet because I'm doing things. As in, I'm preventing problems by good practices, following good standards, and I've been able to execute, and I can show you why we're stable. The best problem you want to have is somebody come in your office and question why things are so quiet. That'd be a really good problem to have. So in thinking about preventing problems, you want to make sure you install a source control per Sitecore role if you can. And if not, use includes that designate per role. So when I do a patch include, I'm ensuring that it is properly role-based. So I might even say, I'll actually add environment as well to my web.config. To show, okay, if it's prod and it's CD, this patch file applies. So if you're not going to have source control per role, or use containerized solutions where you have a base image that's CM or CD or reporting, whatever that may be, or a custom application that you're running to support the Sitecore environment, don't forget about your custom applications as part of your ecosystem. Make sure that you have your source control such that you understand and can deploy to a fresh environment. Because if you can get to that step where your whole environment could go away today and you could redeploy a fresh one, you're in a great place. So just consider it by role or using patch include files that designate by role to make sure that you're deploying properly. Make sure you have clear DevOps governance. This also prepares you for, whether AKS, PaaS, or SaaS. Whether you're on-prem now or looking towards something else or already in SaaS. DevOps with proper stage gates helps you test. It creates clarity and ensures that environments have the same architectural integrity. When I speak to architectural integrity, these have the same type of roles. In production, it might be a different scale. You might have like 20 CDs, for example, in production, maybe just 2 in dev, but they're the same roles and same types. So if you can follow architectural integrity with good DevOps, talking about stage gates that you go through to check off your code with QA, with regression testing, hopefully automated regression testing, you're going to be in a great place. I can't emphasize the next point enough. Load test, load test, load test, please, in a lower environment. It's not just before you go live, but you can scale up your staging environment to match your production if you want, or keep it at its current size and do a estimated load, like a 10x load less of production, just to stress it out and say, okay, in an environment of like size and features, can I produce a result under load that gets me the expected outcome? Many times custom code issues or configuration issues won't kind of show their ugly head, so to speak, until you've already put them under pressure. So if you can put load testing in, again, BlazeMeter is a great tool, attached to your stage gate, use Azure DevOps, automate it to run a load test and see what the outputs are, you're going to be in a much better place than worrying about running around production at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I can't emphasize this next one enough. If you do not have a WAF and a CDN, don't put a website into production. The web application firewall, the complexity and the algorithms of DDoSes to even just bots today is so complex that is not something you want to go into the wild without. That WAF is there to protect you, and most oftentimes as a CDN and a bunch of other cool tools, even image resizing for responsiveness, that can help your application be more stable. So we want to offload as much as we can from your front-end servers to edge devices. And we want that edge device, the WAF, to be really protecting you as much as possible. Not just from bad people. Again, we don't want to assume nefarious deeds or nefarious. We want to just be prepared for managing traffic that is expected and desired, and only let that come through your application layer when it needs to retrieve something that it needs. So if you can offload your content and your images up to the edge device, and your edge device just pulls that content when needed, you're in a much safer place for your core application stability. Next up, can emphasize enough, implement publishing governance and workflows. Don't allow your content authors to all be able to publish a site. Because somebody publishes a site and you've got a lot of load there and maybe things that shouldn't be published. And this gets into liability. You could have some dangerous aspects here for your legal team. If you publish content that is not cleared by legal, that was supposed to be cleared by legal, and someone went around the publishing governance, or you didn't establish publishing governance, your organization or your client's organization can now be liable for a lot of damages. And so you have to be very, very careful about publishing content. Talk about the 4 C's, content's a big one. So use workflows, use approval states. Make sure that what you're going to production with in public display matches your governance and desire of your organization. So one mistake, like a pricing mistake, you're going to be on the hook for selling that $100 product for $1 if you publish a $1 product. You'll be on the hook if you publish a page that wasn't up to date on some kind of HR policy. You'll be on the hook for falsely advertising something for a career opportunity or a job opportunity if you mispublish something that was not accurate. That's why I'm stressing this so much. It's a slippery slope. It's a dangerous area. Hopefully I've scared you all enough that you want publishing governance and workflows. And if you got a bad deployment, switching back over to how long do we stay with bad stuff? Don't try to fix it in a prod. Let's talk about a rollback plan. And part of your governance, which should be documented, you should meet at least quarterly with your governance team. That includes infrastructure, your business owners. Get together, talk about the path of your application, not just your code base. Talk about your user journeys. Talk about how you're trying to meet the goals of tomorrow. It's going to make everyone more engaged and really one team working on one mission. And part of that is having a good rollback plan for when disaster strikes. Properly scale your infrastructure edge devices. That load testing again is really critical here. So if you need to upscale, your Cloudflare to offer more features, do that. Evaluate that first. Don't just throw power at the problem though. So if you see that you're scaling up and up and up, check your code base and say, how effective is this? Maybe install SonarQube and get some sniffs going on and ask the question, am I being modular enough in my code? Am I offloading what I'm supposed to do? Let's not just throw power at the problem. Let's identify what the problem is through the APM tooling those aspects to get to the root of where the problems are at. And and please check your certificates and any third-party integrations. Oftentimes, we forget about third-party integrations. We assume they're taken care of, but they impact us. We depend on them. They can make our site really slow too. So pull up your Google Insights and take a look at Lighthouse and say, hey, we're slow because of this third-party integration. Well, let's look at that. Why is that slow? Or hey, what's going on with our certificates? They expired, and you know what? This is not serving up our traffic the way we expect it. So a couple other ones to consider. When you're talking about moving between environments, you've got a bunch of content. Don't override databases. Don't copy prod down to QA and dev or stage. Consider content syncing. Consider Sitecore Sidekick implemented across your environments. Synchronize because there are artifacts and tables that are specific for the environment, like your event queue. There's also another table that I've got a blog out about that you want to clear out if you are going to migrate things. So be aware of that. You just don't want to carte blanche copy databases down, but lean towards content synchronization. Before you go to production, soft launch and load test. Before going live for the first time, a soft launch is a great way to go. In that you have everything in the production environment, all the code's there, you've got a content freeze in place, everything's scaled up, and you use dummy URLs to hit the site and see how it goes. The public's not there yet. So launch day then is not deploying code into production. Launch day instead becomes, okay, DNS switch, and you go about your day. Then you can go have a launch party. So last thing, two other key points to really consider is adhere to Sitecore best practices instead of getting creative. Let's not work around Sitecore. If it has some kind of issue, contact Sitecore support, try to work with them. But let's not try to codify around it because that's just going to incur technical debt. And when you go to upgrade your Sitecore platform, you're going to find yourself in a tough pinch. And you're going to have to pay off the technical debt. And it may be unpleasant. Again, a last thing to consider here is using include files and not override your default DLLs. DLLs are there for a reason. Try not to touch the Sitecore DLLs where possible and use include files to patch instead of modifying inline the Sitecore.config as an example, or maybe content search. Let's let Sitecore's files do what it's supposed to do and have that separation of here is Sitecore, here's my custom layer, and never the twain shall meet. Don't intermerge them. Let Sitecore be independent of your custom code layer. You're going to thank yourself later for when it comes time for migration. And when you think about migration, be prepared for that. Using linear stage gates and DevOps to check for promoting makes migration easier and upgrading easier. Having automated manual QA and clearly defined UAT scope helps you tremendously to really have that smooth flow. So if you're upgrading, you have 10.2 in production right now, and you have a 10.3 coming behind it, you now have a clear sense of what it is in runbooks. Disaster can strike. So get a DR environment and test it and test failovers on a regular basis. You do not want to fail over into failure. If you let your DR environment be stale for a year, you probably don't want to fail over into it. You want something that's warm and can really take on that load in a crisis. And lastly, I say this, don't deploy on Friday. Admittedly, a couple months ago, I did deploy 3 deployments on Friday, but I had good reason for it, and there was reduced risk. But try not to deploy on Friday. It stresses your resources. It stresses people out. Get into more of a regular deployment cadence, and if you follow these preventative aspects and good stage gates, it sounds like it's not troubleshooting, but it really is troubleshooting because you're preventing those issues, you're smoothing out your processes, you're reducing that risk, and you could even go to daily deployments if you want to. I just urge them out on Friday in case something goes wrong. So closing out, I do have some favorite tools and methods to consider. Sitecore Log Analyzer, I love that to grab the Sitecore logs and tell me what errors are there. Download online, it's still out there. Follow the traffic path method. So I start from the front and the back method when I'm troubleshooting. I'm like, okay, from the front end, what's the issue? I don't immediately go to the back end and assume the database is an infrastructure. I start at the front end and say, okay, what's going on in the front end? Is there anything CSS, JS wise before I go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper? Leverage the built-in Sitecore admin tools. There's a ton there to help you. Get an APM like New Relic or comparable APM like Datadog. It's going to help you a ton. Load testing tools with intelligence, not just JMeter. I'm talking about really hitting individual pages and actually load testing your user journey. Taking the time to set up and say, okay, I want a test that's going to go through a whole checkout process and emulate what my user does. And I'm going to have it as a regular thing that I run each deployment as a regression test. You can use that as part of your load testing tool and turn that into one of your regression tests that you have. Also consider unit tests. Unit tests are great in your code base for making sure that you're in a good place for troubleshooting and debugging. GTmetrix, PageSpeed Insights, and Google Lighthouse are great for analyzing potential latency issues. Usually it's going to highlight your third-party integrations. Sometimes it'll even show that Google is a problem, like Google fonts are too heavy. If you can, look at Azure DevOps, Datadog, and custom Azure dashboards to get a holistic view of your environment. Sometimes you get tunnel vision when we're troubleshooting, right? We're looking at this one little CD server when the issue might be wider. So if you can get good dashboards that look at your environment, you're going to be in a better place. We talked earlier about databases and respecting the databases. Content syncing and database comparison tools are great to understand what you have across the environments. And the last 3 things that I really can't emphasize enough. There's a large community of experts in Sitecore. We love helping each other. And Sitecore has a great knowledge base of known issues right here linked up. And Sitecore support's always willing to help out. And there's last resort. I also always urge you to please check your code first. Check these layers first. Go through the 12-step runbook. Well, they're there to help. And the main thing I just want to impart to you is try not to do anything weird here. You'll find you have a lot less issues if you embrace more DevOps and more stage gates and get to a better place in that methodology. And if you do have trouble, here's a runbook to follow in this presentation. And I hope that some of this has helped you, scared you maybe a little bit, or brought you at least a giggle on some of the weird things that I've seen from the field as far as troubleshooting and the aha moments. But the main takeaway here is that most issues are preventable, but it takes doing some of the ugly work to get it done. So far better to do the hard and boring work of documentation, governance, and good DevOps than to be up at 3 o'clock in the morning asking somebody, hey, does anybody remember where somebody put that? Or who did what? Because that's a great way to lose teams quickly and to lose the trust of your clients. So I'll close there and open up for any additional questions, comments, or concerns. And just a thank you. Thank you for having me today. And thank you for hearing me rattle on about one of my favorite topics. I hope this helps you.